Hello and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 12 of the Silmarillion of Min. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the Librarian. Today we are diving into Chapter 12 of the Silmarillion of Min. And to be honest, probably don't need this video. This chapter is very short, it doesn't deal with a whole lot, it just deals of Min coming into the world. That's pretty much it. So I'm making this video for the sake of completeness so that there's one for each chapter, but it's going to be short. There's not a whole lot to go over. So let's do what we normally do. We'll do vocabulary, major characters, major events, and major themes. First up, we have some vocabulary. The vocabulary for this is Min. That's really the only word you need to learn. We really haven't talked about Min yet, but Min are the focus of this chapter. And when we say Min, we are talking about humans, the human race in Middle-earth. And the humans, the Min, are the second group of Iluvatar's children. So the elves are the firstborn and the Min are the secondborn. And that's all you need to know for vocab. Now let's go into major characters. There aren't any. There are no major characters in this. It's just talking about Min coming to be, and it doesn't talk about any man in particular or anybody else in particular, really. So then we have major events. Well, this doesn't deal with a lot of events, but there's a couple of things that we can kind of point out here as being major parts of the chapter. The first one is that the Valar kind of leave Middle-earth unattended. They know that they've made some mistakes along the way. They haven't always done things the best. They've kind of, well, messed it up a little bit with the elves and bringing them over to Amon and things like that. Those haven't all turned out so well. So the Valar are kind of taking a break, for lack of a better term. They're just kind of letting things ride. And so they don't really know that the Min have woken up or anything. And that brings us to the second kind of major event here. Only we don't know exactly what happened with it, but it's the awakening of Min. It happens with the rising of the sun. And so elves are really associated with stars and starlight because they awaken under the stars. Min, on the other hand, are associated with sunlight, because they awaken when the sun comes up. But we don't really know what happens to them. We have a lot about the elves and their awakening and that kind of thing in the Silmarillion, but also in a lot of other of Tolkien's posthumously published works. We learn a lot more about that, but of Min, we don't really know that much. Something happens to them, but we don't know what. All we're going to know later on is that they don't want to talk about it. And that's pretty much it for major events. There is another thing that kind of gets brought up in this chapter, but it's not really an event, and that is just, they're just basically kind of illuminating the differences between elves and men. Now remember, the Silmarillion is written from the elvish perspective, and up until then that's been the only perspective there really was to have. There really isn't much else to talk about. But now we have Min, but the Silmarillion continues to be written from an elvish perspective. And so what we get about Min is really what the elves think about Min. So what they say here is elves are wiser, elves are stronger, and of course that's from the elvish perspective. And then they also talk about how elves, when they die, they go back to Mandos, and they don't know what happens to Min. They think that maybe Min go back to Mandos, but they don't know. Elves go back to Mandos and are eventually rehoused in new bodies, but nobody knows what happens to Min, except that they die and no one knows where they go. The other thing that the elves point out is that Min die really easily. So elves can die, they don't die naturally, but Min seem to die really easily. They're easily killed by wounds and by sickness and by old age. Like, Min are just dying all the time, and elves don't. And of course, that's a major point of contrast for the elves who are writing this. All right, then major themes. There's not a lot of major themes to go off of here, except the one that is front and center, and that is mortality. And this idea that growth is kind of linked to mortality. The elves really like things to stay the same. They don't like things to grow and change. Whereas Min, they're more into that because their time is short. They need to experience growth quickly because of their own mortality. And that's it for chapter 12. There really isn't much else to say. It won't take you very long to read, but do let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below. Until next time, farewell wherever you fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.